Well, welcome everyone. Today I'm really excited. We have with us Professor Constantine Sedikides. He's a professor of social and personality psychology within Psychology Department of University of Southampton. That's right, he's coming from across the ocean. He's over in the UK. He's going to be talking to us today about nostalgia. I've always wondered what the psychological impact of nostalgia is because it seems to be very, very close to our heart. Every time I share anything nostalgic on social media, I'll get hundreds of comments or hundreds of tweets or likes, whatever it is. So I see there's a big poignant message there. And I want to find out more about it. So today, Professor Constantine is going to tell us a little bit more of what he's found on it. So let's welcome to the show, Professor Constantine. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, you were telling me before the show how this all got started. So how did this get started for you?
Well, as a habitual immigrant, I'm from Greece, and where I spent my first 20 years and spending the next 20 years in the US. After my family and I traveled for a European adventure to the UK, I had lunch with a nice colleague here, a clinical psychologist, who asked me whether I felt nostalgic about Chapel Hill, where I was. I told him, of course, that's a lovely town. I feel nostalgic for it, for my friends, the way the air smells in October, all that. And he said, well, that's a problem. How often do you feel nostalgic? I said, well, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Well, he said, are you sure you're not depressed? I said, no, I've never been depressed. I'm happy. Whenever I feel nostalgic about Chapel Hill, I feel good. And no, he said, that cannot be. Nostalgia is bad for you. You live in the past. Check it out. I talked to a couple of other people about it, and they told me the same thing. So nostalgia had a bad connotation. You should avoid escapism. Forget about the past. The future is the way. So I started reading about it. And indeed, these ideas about nostalgia being a maladaptive emotion can be traced back to the 17th century to a Swiss psychologist, the first person to investigate nostalgia in his dissertation. Hofer is his name, who argued that nostalgia is a serious medical and neurological disease.
Wow.
His inference was that Switzerland was a poor country, so Swiss youngsters had to make money for their families. So they work as mercenaries in wealthier European countries like France. So Hofer was a case study, studied these mercenaries, and he discovered that they had some discomforting symptoms, sadness and depression and all that. And he theorized that, well, nostalgia enters your brain and messes up your brain, and that's why you're so sick. And for a couple of 100 years, many people repeated what Hofer was saying. And these people, actually for about 300 years, and these people got the direction of causation wrong. They thought that nostalgia makes you sad and depressed and anxious. It's the other way around. When you find yourself in difficult circumstances, like being a foreigner in a foreign land whose culture you don't understand, being 16 years old and away from your parents and family. When you live in those circumstances, you use nostalgia to cope with anxiety and depression and all those bad things. So it's the negative things that cause nostalgia. It's not that nostalgia causes the negative things. When you take that into, it's an inferential error, a serious inferential error. When you control for that, you find indeed that nostalgia is a very useful coping mechanism, very useful coping emotion when we have to deal with difficulties like sadness and loneliness, low meaning in life, you name it.
That's fascinating. I've never heard as it being considered maladaptive. I mean, I guess I could see why maybe they went that route, but you can definitely tell the causal factor of it. Let me ask you, there's so many questions I wanted to ask you. I'm trying to get my head straight here. The first one was neuroscience, because obviously when you say that it brings back good memories, have we seen any kind of research at all in regards to dopamine increasing, serotonin increasing, anything of that nature?
There is nothing on that. That's a wonderful question. We've started doing research on that. We had, of course, to find experts. I'm not a neuroscientist, so we are hooking up with experts to look into these and how the emotion, for example, is sort of represented in the brain and how it's associated with chemical reactions in the brain. So give me another 5 years and I'll tell you all about it.
No worries. Get some dissertation students out there to do some work now. Let me ask you this one. Any particular nostalgia is more powerful than others? Like sometimes a restaurant that you used to visit when you were younger, or a town that you used to go see, or anything of that nature? Do you notice any differences there?
Yes. Many nostalgic memories come from what we call the reminiscence bump period. So these are between our 15, 16, and 27, 28 years of life. This is where we form truly meaningful memories that we take with us for the rest of our lives. Not only that, but within those reminiscence bump period, we find that nostalgic memories are associated very closely with one's childhood or adolescence, family home, parents, good times with parents, momentous events from that life, graduation, birthday celebrations, anniversaries, this sort of thing, vacations, holidays. And generally, relationships. Nostalgia is a very relational, social emotion.
That makes perfect sense. I know one of the things I was looking at too is, well, childhood, you mentioned it, is there's a lot of every time I post anything on social media, like cartoons, old TV shows, it's interesting how we always look back at those times and think they're better than the present. Is it because we're looking back during a time that we're not so happy with? As you mentioned earlier, we get depressed, whatever, because we're leaving somewhere and we look back. Is that why?
Yes, one reason may be the contrast between a sort of slightly negative present and more positive past. Another reason is that nostalgic memories are mostly positive. They are ambivalent, they are bittersweet, because when we nostalgize, yes, we think about those momentous events from their life, but also we feel this sense of yearning and longing and sadness because those valued moments are gone forever, right? So it's bittersweet, but mostly positive. But another reason also has to do with how the brain works. So there is this phenomenon according to which it's called fading affect bias, according to which negative affect evaporates faster than positive affect from events in our lives. So positive affect maintains its trajectory, and in fact increases, but negative affect goes down. That's how the brain handles memories, right? And because nostalgic memories are personal and meaningful and important, it's positive affect within nostalgic memories that lasts and indeed increases, as opposed to negative affect. So our feeling that nostalgic memories are positive and the past was positive is real. That's the negative affect that has remained and this has distilled in our brains.
Fascinating. We definitely got to get some neuroscientists involved here.
We need them badly, yes.
Yes, because that'd be really fascinating to see what parts of the brain hold nostalgia. It obviously seems like it's a little different area than PTSD or something traumatic that happened 30 years before.
Indeed, I'm glad you mentioned this, Carlos, because there are several ways to think about one's past. And nostalgia is one of them. It's a very important one, but just one of them. So we've been wondering about that. For example, you compare. We try to compare nostalgia with another two ways of thinking about one's past that seem to be similar to nostalgia. One of them is rumination, when you think over and over about past events. The other is counterfactual thinking. So what if I had closed that window and the thief hadn't entered my house, this sort of thing? What if? And what we found is that nostalgia, or a nostalgic way of thinking, is fundamentally different from other ways of thinking in terms of, first, intimacy or relationships. So nostalgia is social, relational. The other ways are not. Another is self-regard, self-esteem. Nostalgia makes you feel good about yourself. The other ways of thinking about your past do not. And another is a function called teach, inform, or motivation, basically. When you feel nostalgic, you want to go out and do things. Nostalgia is future-oriented, paradoxically. Rumination and counterfactual thinking are not so, not as much so.
Oh, that's fascinating. Good content. Interesting contrast. I didn't even think about that. Let me see. I got so many things here. One of the things I'm noticing, which I've talked to several people about, and it has to be a new phenomenon over the last 70 years now. Can't believe how much difference it is. And it's this erasing of nostalgia. I'll put it that way. It's the erasing of nostalgia. What I mean by that is, I'm not sure if you're a music fan.
I am.
Okay. Frank Sinatra.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have famous singers like that of yesteryear in the 1950s and 60s, when they redo the songs with new singers in today's world, what I'm noticing is, you're getting where I'm going.
You don't like that, no.
Yeah, what happens is it's when you look it up on the internet, you don't even find them sometimes. You find the new artist instead of the old artist. And it's almost like part of your history is being erased.
Wonderful.
And that's going to be psychologically, I'm noticing it's psychologically painful for a lot of people because their nostalgia is being erased from memory. And it never happened before because you didn't have all this internet and stuff like that. So, and you didn't have Frankie singing anywhere. What do you think about that?
Wonderful. Although we have not done research on that, we've thought about it. Nostalgia is also an identity-based emotion. Nostalgia is who we are. It's the place we go to find ourselves. That's us. And now suddenly, when Frank Sinatra is being re-sang by someone else, we feel like something is being taken away from us. They stole our Frank, our blue eyes. This was ours. This was, how could they do that? So it's like part of our identity is gone. It's like someone cut off our arm. We don't like it.
Exactly. So I'm noticing it with new movies and new shows, and I understand the new generation wants their version of things, but I can see it increasing the clash between generational differences because you have one saying you're erasing my memory of Mission Impossible with this new version, or you're erasing James Bond or whatever it is. And it's interesting to see that.
Yes, a similar phenomenon, you mentioned this intergenerational conflict. A similar phenomenon is when younger and older people argue about athletes. For me, Michael Jordan was the best. But for youngsters, they pop out other names, this sort of thing. Can they see that my footballing or basketball heroes were wonderful and noble and knights in shining armor? How do they dare?
That's a good point, too. I didn't think about that. Then you have the classic, some video games have been able to try to put those two athletes against each other, right? Muhammad Ali against Mike Tyson, and those video games are trying to bring together a bridge between both generations.
Yes, and people also think that politicians back then were more honest than they are now, and more straightforward, and you could trust them more, this sort of thing.
They haven't read a book, politicians, I guess. Yeah.
But we grew up with them,
I have to admit, I mean, with politicians, it's interesting because they were really out of the news a lot. The only time you ever saw them in the news was with positive light most of the time, or they got in trouble, and that was about it. Now we see them all the time. So it's really a different phenomenon. Anyway, I don't want to go that route. But we saw cartoons. We talked about differences in cartoons, music, sports, all these different nostalgic events. One of the other ones that really hits home a lot, and I'm seeing it again in society today, conflicting a little bit, is holidays. Christmas is funny to me, and it's extremely intriguing to me because it's not that long. It's only been about 80, 90 years. And the version we know today is very different because it's only been around, 60, 70? Because Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer didn't really come around till the 1940s, Frosty the Snowman. But you know what the fascinating thing, Constantine, is that everybody acts like it's been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it's only been around for maybe a couple generations. What's your take on Christmas?
Well, Christmas, when we do studies and we ask our participants to write down their nostalgic memories, Christmas holidays are at the very top of the list. It brings the family together, good food. Yes, there are some fights here and there, as they are in Thanksgiving, but overall, this is so meaningful. It's like it's coming home, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess why we think that Christmas was always there, it's so meaningful to us and so present to us and so important to us, but perhaps we extend it backwards in time in appropriate ways. We want it to last. We want it to be like that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if it's created, if you make it feel like it's longer, maybe it has even more of an impact, the connection to I don't want to say our ancestors, but I guess maybe to a further generation back. I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that too. I mean, a key function of nostalgia, what nostalgia does for us, is self-continuity, is continuity. Nostalgia, for example, strengthens our sense of continuity with our past. Now, this idea of self-continuity is not trivial. Self-continuity underlies psychological health or psychological illness. Most psychological illnesses are characterized by the absence of continuity, are characterized by discontinuity between one's present and one's past. And indeed, the presence of self-continuity is strongly related to psychological health. It's very important to feel continuity with your past. And nostalgia strengthens it. When you feel nostalgic, you feel a strong sense of continuity with your past and with your remote past even.
That reminds me a little bit of the Bible, when people who are Christians who then go to Israel to visit Bethlehem, to visit where Jesus walked, and all these things. I don't know if you would even call that nostalgia, because it's not their past, but it connects them to the story of the Bible 2,000 years ago. And I don't know if some people view it as a nostalgia. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, they do. It's interesting because when you look at countries with a long history, China, those great cultures, ancient culture, China, India, and the country I come from, Greece, people oftentimes feel nostalgic, highly inappropriately, about those old times. And a similar point is this: we do research with undergraduates in the US, and they feel nostalgic about the 60s. Well, they were born in 2000. So this sense of nostalgia increases this continuity with their past. It makes them feel good. I belong to those people. It's just continuity. I'm one of them. It's a form of relationship with your past. It strengthens it. It makes you feel safe.
There's the big target right there, right? The big key, feeling safe, secure. Now we're going to attachment theory with Bowlby. Interesting. We have a few minutes left, and I'm trying to take it into the direction now of treatment. Again, it popped up in my head. I don't know if you've looked at it at all, or maybe going to consider looking at it in the future, is possibly doing like nostalgia treatment, where maybe they can write a nostalgia journal in times of the depressed and things of that nature.
That's also a wonderful point, Carlos. First, let me say that we wanted to find out very quickly whether nostalgia can help not only people who are not depressed, but also people who are depressed. And it does. It helps people when in a depressive mood as much as those who are not in a depressive mood. So it has therapeutic implications. We also looked at nostalgia in bereavement. And quite surprisingly, we found that bereaved persons feel better. Their symptoms of anxiety and depression and loneliness are alleviated when they feel nostalgic about their partner, about their spouse.
Wow.
But also, we have doing a lot of studies looking at nostalgia in relation to Alzheimer's disease. And we did find that when we induce nostalgia in individuals who live with Alzheimer's, they feel better, their self-esteem goes up, self-continuity, they feel connected with their past. And these positive consequences last quite a while, more so than their nostalgic memories.
Oh.
So nostalgia increases quality of life among those individuals as well.
Fascinating. Wow. So I could definitely see it as a form of treatment. Now, when you did nostalgia, what did you see in those studies? Were they showing videos? Were they having them just reminisce about the past? What were you doing? What were they doing?
We did it through conversations and photographs.
Oh, conversations and photographs.
Yes. But our long-term goal is indeed to develop sort of a nostalgia therapy, something akin to reminiscence therapy, which just does not work well at all.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, because
should be called reminiscence therapy then.
Well, in reminiscence, you reminisce about everything, and you end up ruminating and doing counterfactual thinking and feeling bitter about life. But in nostalgia therapy, you don't do that. You won't be doing that. You'll be dwelling on meaningful memories of your past.
You know, my listeners out there with the research background are probably going to ask, how long were the effects for those people that had the treatment? Did they stay happier? Did they feel better for long periods of time, or is it just a very short couple of days? Any information on that?
Indeed, that's a very fair question. It has to do with the limits of nostalgia, and of course there are limits and boundaries. We just completed a study, it's in print now, where we had a nostalgia intervention. So asking participants to become nostalgic, say 2 or 3 times a week for a few weeks. And then we followed them up to 6 months. Now, 3 months afterwards, the positive effects of nostalgia persisted. So participants in the nostalgia group felt better, more socially connected, more self-continuity, more optimistic about the future, you name it. Now, from 3 to 6 months, we saw a divergence. Those who were high on nostalgia to begin with, who were predisposed towards nostalgia, those benefited equally well. But those who were low on nostalgia to begin with did not benefit that well. And indeed, we started seeing some rather non-significant but rather negative trends. So I guess, long story short, it depends whether one is predisposed to nostalgia to begin with. If one is predisposed to nostalgia, the positive effects of nostalgia will last much longer than if one is not.
Fascinating. And I guess in the interim too, you can always do work with that person to try to get into the deeper roots, and that would hopefully make it last longer.
Indeed.
Fascinating stuff. Well, Constantine, I know we're running out of time, but I have to ask you a favor, though. If you have further research, let me know. We can bring you back and you can give us an update of what's going on.
This has been a wonderful discussion, Carlos. Thank you very much for having me here as a guest.
Well, thank you very much for being here. What a fascinating. I tell you, I felt better just talking about it. I don't know about you. It was interesting. Folks, if you want to, is there anywhere they can go for get more information about your work, or just go to your website on Southampton? Or
yes, and we also have a nostalgia website at Southampton.
Oh, excellent, folks! You can go to the nostalgia website down in Southampton. Folks, again, if you want to support our podcast, make sure to share and subscribe, and maybe this will become part of your nostalgia in the future.